Are you waiting for someone who's never coming back too?
Thank you, it's just a lot.
The girl to the CEO at the train station.
I hope so.
Nate Whitmore looked up. The question came from a 19-year-old girl sitting alone on a wooden bench at Philadelphia's 30th Street station, holding an old work bag against her chest like it was the last piece of home she had left. It was almost midnight. The final train to New York was delayed. The platform was nearly empty, and Nate, once the CEO of Whitmore Rail Systems, had nowhere left to go. That morning, his name had been on the doors of a company his father built. By nightfall, it was on every news screen in the station. CEO resigns amid financial scandal. Grace Miller didn't know any of that. She only saw a man in an expensive suit sitting too still, staring at the tracks like he was waiting for a life that had already left without him. She had been left behind, too. Her boyfriend had boarded a bus to New York without her, after telling her she was too heavy to carry into a new life. In her father's old work bag were a one-way ticket, a half-eaten sandwich, and sketches of dresses she was too afraid to believe in. Nate should have ignored her. Grace should have kept quiet. Instead, two strangers sat side by side in the cold light of the station, not trying to fix each other, not pretending the night would be kind. And by the time the last train finally came, neither of them would be waiting for the same ghosts anymore. It was almost midnight. The station had that strange after-hours sadness all large places carried when the crowds were gone. The high ceilings swallowed every sound. The vending machines hummed to themselves. A janitor pushed a mop across the far end of the floor with the patience of someone who had seen every kind of goodbye. Above them, the speaker crackled. The final train to New York Penn Station has been delayed due to signal issues. We apologize for the inconvenience. A few passengers groaned. One man cursed under his breath. Most simply stared at the departure board, too tired to be angry. Nate sat very still. He wore a navy suit that had cost too much and now looked like it belonged to someone else. His tie was loosened. His white shirt was wrinkled at the cuffs. Beside him sat a leather briefcase his father had carried for 20 years, back when Whitmore was still a family name spoken with pride instead of suspicion. His phone lit up again. He did not touch it. On the screen was another headline: Whitmore Rail Systems CEO resigns amid financial scandal. Then another. Thousands of employees face uncertainty after Whitmore collapse. Then his mother's name appeared. He turned the phone face down. The girl was still watching him. Nate should have ignored her. He had ignored board members, reporters, shareholders, and 3 calls from his lawyer in the last hour. A stranger with red eyes and a trembling voice should have been easy. But her question had landed somewhere too accurate. Someone who was never coming back. His father, his career, his reputation. The version of himself who still believed silence could be noble if it was done for the right reasons. Nate looked toward the tracks. "No," he said at last. "I don't think I'm waiting for a person." The girl nodded like that made perfect sense. That might be worse. He almost smiled but could not manage it. She immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, I ask weird things when I'm sad. Maybe sad people ask the most honest questions." That made her look at him more carefully. Her name, she told him after a moment, was Grace Miller, 19, from Lancaster County, supposed to be on her way to New York with her boyfriend Lucas, who had promised they would start over together. The sentence stopped there. Nate did not push. He had learned, too late, that people often revealed more truth in what they could not finish. Grace rubbed her thumb over the cracked handle of the work bag in her lap. "He said I didn't know what I wanted," she said quietly, "that I was too heavy to carry into a new life." Nate's eyes moved to the thin jacket around her shoulders, the cheap boots still damp from the rain outside, the train ticket folded and refolded on the bench beside her. "He said that here?" Grace gave a small shrug that failed to hide the wound. "Near the bus entrance. Then he got on without me." Nate looked away. There were many kinds of cruelty. Some arrived loudly. Some wore the face of practicality. "I'm sorry," he said. Grace let out a humorless little breath. "People keep saying that tonight. It's starting to sound like a weather report." The honesty of it startled him. "My name is Nate," he said. "Are you going to New York too? I bought a ticket." "That's not what I asked." This time he did smile faintly. "I don't know where I'm going." Grace seemed to accept that answer more easily than most adults would have. "What did you lose?" she asked. Nate looked down at his father's briefcase. "A job." She studied him with the blunt perception of someone too tired to be polite. "That suit says it was more than a job." He did not answer. The phone on the bench beside him lit up again. This time Grace's eyes caught the headline before he could turn it over. Her expression changed. Not recognition at first, then understanding. On the television mounted near the waiting area, a news anchor's voice rose over footage of the Whitmore Rail Systems headquarters. A photograph of Nate appeared beside the words CEO resigns. A few travelers turned toward the screen, then toward him. The shift was quiet but immediate. Whispers moved across the platform. Someone lifted a phone. Another person said his name as if tasting whether it was true. Nate felt his body become public property. A man in a gray coat stood from the row across the aisle. He was in his late 60s, with heavy hands, tired eyes, and the posture of someone who had spent his life standing through long shifts. He walked straight toward Nate. "You're him," the man said. Nate stood. Grace tightened her arms around the bag. The man pointed at the screen. "Whitmore, that's your company." Nate's throat felt dry. "It was. My pension was tied up in that company," the man said. His voice shook not with weakness, but with controlled rage. 34 years, track maintenance. Nights, weekends, storms, Christmas mornings. They told us Whitmore took care of its own. Nate said nothing. Because what could he say? That he had not stolen the money? True. That he had not created the false projections. Also true. That he had suspected something was wrong and waited too long because he thought disclosure would destroy the company his father built. Truest of all, the man stepped closer. "Did you know?" The platform went silent. A woman nearby kept recording. Nate could feel Grace watching him, feel every stranger waiting for him to become the villain cleanly enough that their anger would know where to land. "I knew there were problems," Nate said. "I didn't know how deep. That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No." The man's face twisted. "People like you always resign. People like me just lose." Nate lowered his eyes. He could have called his lawyer. He could have walked away. He could have said there would be an investigation, and all questions should be directed through counsel. Instead, he stood there and took it, because the man deserved more than a polished sentence. Then Grace rose, young, small, and visibly scared. But she stepped between them just enough to break the circle forming around Nate. "If you need to be angry at him, you probably have every right," she said. The man looked at her. "This isn't your business. I know." Her voice shook, but she kept going. "But don't turn an empty train platform into a courtroom for a man who looks like he's trying to remember how to breathe." No one spoke. Grace did not defend Nate. She did not call him innocent. She did not ask the man to forgive him. That was why it worked. The older man looked from her to Nate, then back to the screen. Something in his face collapsed, not into forgiveness, but exhaustion. He put his phone away. "I hope you lose sleep," he said to Nate. Nate nodded. "I already have." The man walked off toward the far end of the platform. Slowly, the others lost interest. The station returned to its late-night quiet, but it was not the same quiet as before. Grace sat down again. After a moment, Nate did too. His hands were shaking. He folded them together so she would not see. Grace reached into her father's old work bag and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. It had been pressed flat, probably from being carried all day. She unwrapped it, broke it in half, and held one piece out to him. Nate stared at it. "I'm not hungry," he said. "Neither am I." He looked at her then. Her eyes were still red. Her boyfriend was still gone. Her ticket was still one way. She was 19 and heartbroken and had no reason in the world to offer kindness to a disgraced man in a ruined suit. But she did. Nate took the sandwich. For the first time that night, he felt like something other than a headline. The train did not come. Another announcement crackled through the ceiling speakers, apologizing for the delay as if the word sorry could warm the platform or put people back where they belonged. Grace and Nate moved into the small waiting area beside the tracks, where the lights were softer but somehow lonelier. A vending machine blinked in the corner. 2 college students slept against their backpacks. Near the window, an old woman knitted without looking down, as if she had been waiting for something all her life and had learned not to ask when it would arrive. Grace sat with her father's work bag on her lap. Its brown leather cracked at the corners, the handle darkened from years of use. It looked too old for a 19-year-old girl, too practical beside her thin jacket and the folded sketches peeking from her pocket. Nate noticed how she held it, not like luggage, like a hand. Grace followed his gaze and brushed her thumb over the worn clasp. The bag had belonged to Tommy Miller, her father, who had worked maintenance on rail lines most of his adult life. He had known schedules by heart, could identify a problem from the sound of a wheel, and came home smelling of steel, rain, and machine oil. After he died of a heart attack, Grace kept the bag beside her bed for months. Then slowly she began carrying it everywhere. She told people it was useful, strong, better than the cheap tote bags that ripped after 2 weeks. The truth was simpler and more embarrassing. When she carried it, she felt less abandoned, as if some small part of her father was still walking her home. Nate did not laugh when she admitted that. He only looked at the briefcase beside his shoes, his father's. Older, darker, polished by years of boardrooms instead of rail yards. Howard Whitmore had founded Whitmore Rail Systems when Nate was still young enough to believe every train was a promise. To the public, Howard had been a visionary. To Nate, he had been a man who missed dinners, smelled faintly of cigar smoke, and once spent 3 hours teaching him how to read a route map because he said a person should always understand where things were going. Howard died when Nate was 24. By 27, Nate had become the youngest CEO in the company's history, and not because he was ready, because everyone looked at him as if grief had promoted him. From that day on, every room seemed to ask the same thing of him: protect the company, protect the name, protect what your father built. Somewhere along the way, Nate stopped asking whether the thing he was protecting still deserved the cost. Grace listened quietly. She did not offer the soft praise people gave powerful men when they confessed to being tired. She did not say he had done his best. She did not try to make his burden beautiful. That made him trust her more. She told him about New York in pieces. Not the glamorous version Lucas had promised, with tiny apartments and rooftop parties, and a future that looked like a music video. Her New York was made of fabric stores, unpaid internships, design school brochures folded until the paper softened, and the private terror of wanting something her family could not afford. She had been accepted into a small fashion program once, not prestigious enough to impress strangers, but real enough to make her hands shake when the email arrived. Then her father died. Bills came. Her mother's hours were cut. Grace deferred for a semester, then another. Wanting anything for herself began to feel selfish. Lucas had arrived during one of those seasons when loneliness looked too much like romance. He said New York would be easier with 2 people. He said Grace only needed someone to make her brave. Then, at the station that night, he looked at her bag, her sketches, her fear, and decided her life weighed more than his promise. Nate did not insult him. Grace almost wished he would. It would have been easier to hate Lucas if someone else started. Instead, Nate looked toward the dark tracks and said that some people left not because the person beside them was unlovable, but because they were not grown enough to stand near real pain without making it about themselves. Grace studied him after that. She wondered whether he was talking about Lucas, or about himself. Nate's phone rang before she could ask. His mother's name appeared on the screen, Evelyn Whitmore. He answered because habit was stronger than self-respect. Grace heard only Nate's side at first, short, controlled replies, the kind that gave nothing away, but Evelyn's voice was sharp enough to escape the phone. She demanded that he come home immediately. She told him not to speak to reporters, not to trust lawyers outside the family, not to make the Whitmore name look even worse by wandering train stations like a man without discipline. Nate sat through it like a boy being corrected at the dinner table. Grace watched the change come over him. The disgraced CEO disappeared. In his place was a son still trying to earn approval from a mother who had confused survival with obedience. When the call ended, Nate placed the phone face down and stared at it as though it might ring again if he breathed incorrectly. Grace did not comment. A minute later, her own phone buzzed. Lucas. She looked at the message, and the last bit of color left her face. He had made it onto a bus. He was going to New York without her. The final line was the one that did the most damage. You should go home, Grace. New York eats girls like you alive. She read it twice, then she locked the screen. No tears came. That was how Nate knew the message had cut deep. People cried when pain first arrived. When it had already been arriving for years, they simply went quiet. Grace shifted the old work bag on her lap, perhaps needing something to do with her hands. The side pocket had stuck earlier, the old zipper catching on a loose thread. She tugged harder than she meant to, and the pocket finally opened. Inside was a folded envelope yellowed at the edges. Her name was written on it in handwriting she had not seen since the last birthday card her father gave her. Gracie. The station blurred. For a long moment she did not open it. That pocket had always been there. She had known it existed. She had never reached into it because some grief had rooms inside it, and Grace had been afraid that opening every compartment of the bag would mean accepting there was no more of her father left to find. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter. Tommy had written it months before his death. The words were simple, uneven in places, as if he had written during a lunch break. He had been saving money for her design classes. Not much, he admitted, nothing grand, but enough to begin. He wrote that if anything ever happened to him, She was not to mistake staying small for being loyal. He loved her mother. He loved their life. But he had spent years watching Grace draw dresses in the margins of grocery lists, and he wanted her to know that a dream was not a debt she owed anyone an apology for having. Grace covered her mouth. Nate looked away to give her privacy, but his own hands had moved to his father's briefcase. He opened it without thinking. Inside were folders from the board meeting, a legal packet, a pen engraved with Howard Whitmore's initials, and beneath them, tucked into the lining, a small index card. Nate recognized his father's writing immediately. It was not addressed to him. Maybe it had been a note for a speech, maybe a thought Howard had written and forgotten. But the sentence on it landed like a verdict. A company is not worth saving if it costs you the soul of the people inside it, including your own. Nate read it once, then again. For years he had used his father's legacy as a reason to endure, compromise, delay, hide, and call silent strategy. Now this small card suggested Howard might have feared exactly the man Nate had become. Grace held her father's letter. Nate held his father's note. Neither of them spoke. The waiting room had not changed. The vending machine still blinked. The old woman still knitted. The delayed train still had not arrived, but something had shifted between them. Their fathers were gone, yet somehow both men had reached across death and placed in their children's hands the thing they most needed and least wanted to read. Grace wiped her face with the back of her hand. I hate that dead people sometimes leave the right words too late. Nate folded the card carefully, his eyes still lowered. Maybe they're not too late, he said. Maybe we are, unless we do something different now. Grace looked at him then. The tracks beyond the glass were empty. But for the first time that night, waiting did not feel entirely like being abandoned. At 1:17 a.m. the station made it official. The final train to New York was delayed indefinitely. Signal failure, weather complications, no estimated departure time. The announcement echoed across the platform, thin and tired, and a few remaining passengers finally gave up. A couple dragged their suitcases toward the exit. The old woman with the knitting packed her yarn into a canvas bag. Somewhere near the vending machines, a man muttered something about renting a car and disappeared into the cold. Grace stayed. So did Nate. The station grew quieter after that, not peaceful, just emptied out. The kind of quiet that made people hear their own thoughts too clearly. Nate looked at Grace's thin jacket, the old work bag on her lap, the one-way ticket folded beside her. I can get you a hotel room, he said carefully, or a ticket home. Somewhere safe until morning. Grace's face closed. No, I didn't mean I know what you meant. She looked away. But I don't want to be the poor girl rescued by a rich man having the worst night of his life. The sentence hit him harder than he expected. For years, Nate had solved discomfort with logistics. A car, a room, a wire transfer, a lawyer. A quiet arrangement made through someone else. It had never occurred to him how often his help arrived, shaped like control. He leaned back. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. Grace glanced at him, surprised by how quickly he surrendered. Outside the glass, rain had turned to sleet, striking the dark platform in sharp little bursts. Inside, the station vending machines glowed like small, unhealthy promises. Grace stood first. If we're trapped here, I'm getting coffee, Nate followed. The coffee machine produced 2 paper cups of something hot and bitter enough to qualify as punishment. Grace took one sip and stared at him. You paid $4 for this. I've made worse investments. You have terrible taste. I lost my job today. I'm no longer authorized to have good taste. That made her laugh. Only once, but it was real. They bought a packet of dry cookies and returned to the waiting area. Grace broke one in half and made a face before chewing. Nate watched her pretend she did not mind being cold, hungry, and 19 in a city that had just proved promises could leave without warning. After a while, she asked what had really happened at Whitmore. Not the headline version. The human version. Nate stared into the coffee cup, where the liquid had the color and emotional range of motor oil. He told her about the CFO Daniel Ross, a man everyone trusted because he wore calm well. Daniel had hidden shortfalls in infrastructure contracts, moved risk around on paper, and used optimistic projections to cover the gaps. At first it looked like delay, then mismanagement, then something worse. Nate had suspected enough to ask questions. Not enough, he told himself then, to blow up the company. Whitmore Rail Systems had thousands of employees, contracts with cities, maintenance teams, engineers, retirees whose futures were tied to its stability. Nate convinced himself that if he could buy time, if he could fix the hole quietly, if he could keep the company alive until a restructuring, then he was protecting people. Instead, the hole widened. When the truth surfaced, it took everything with it. Grace listened, her expression tightening with each sentence. My dad worked maintenance, she said. Men like him always trust men like you to know what you're doing. Nate nodded. I know, no, I don't think you do. Her voice was quiet, but the anger in it was alive. People at the top make decisions in conference rooms, and people at the bottom find out when their hours get cut, or their retirement disappears, or someone says there's no budget to fix the thing that could kill them. He did not look away. That made her angrier for a moment, because she wanted him to defend himself badly. She wanted him to become the kind of man her anger could easily destroy. But he only said, that's why I don't know who I am anymore. Grace frowned. Nate turned his father's index card between his fingers. I told myself I was the person trying to protect everyone. That was my whole excuse. My whole identity. I wasn't greedy, I wasn't cruel, I was responsible. His mouth tightened. But if my responsibility made me silent when people needed truth, then maybe it was just cowardice in a better suit. Grace looked at him for a long time. Before she could answer, heels clicked against the marble floor. A woman in a camel coat entered the waiting area, carrying a leather folder and the confidence of someone who had not come by accident. She was in her early 30s, composed but tired, with dark hair pinned neatly back and worry sharpened into professionalism. Nate stood before she reached them. Marissa. Grace heard history in the name. Marissa Blake looked first at Nate, then at Grace, then at the half-eaten cookies and terrible coffee between them. You weren't answering your phone, she said. I noticed. Reporters are looking for you. Your mother is calling everyone. The board is preparing a statement that will make you look either incompetent or conveniently absent. Nate's face tightened. Marissa softened slightly, but not much. You need counsel. You need to cooperate with investigators. And you need to stop wandering around train stations like guilt is a travel plan. Grace looked down at her father's bag. She suddenly felt very young. Marissa noticed. Her gaze returned to Nate, sharper now. And you should not be leaning on a girl you met tonight, because she happened to be kind to you during a breakdown. The words landed exactly where Grace was most afraid they would. A girl. Kind, a small soft thing in someone else's crisis. Nate saw her expression change. She's not. Grace stood. It's fine. It was not fine. Marissa was not cruel. That almost made it worse. She was probably right in a practical sense. Grace did not belong in Nate's scandal. She did not belong in the orbit of lawyers, board statements, financial crimes, and mothers who called from town cars. She had already been told once tonight that she was too heavy to carry. Now she was being told she was too light to matter. Before anyone could repair the moment, a voice called from behind them. Mr. Whitmore? A young man in a puffer jacket hurried over, phone already raised, camera light on. His press badge swung from his neck. Nate Whitmore, can you comment on your resignation? Are you fleeing Philadelphia? Is this young woman connected to the investigation? Marissa stepped forward. No comment. But the reporter moved around her, live streaming now. His voice grew louder, feeding on the echo of the station. Sources say Whitmore employees may lose pension protections. Did you know about the hidden losses? Were you with this woman while your company collapsed? Grace froze. The camera turned toward her. In that instant, Nate understood how easily the world could turn a 19-year-old girl's worst night into a rumor that followed her for years. He stepped between Grace and the phone, not behind Marissa, not behind legal language, in front. She has nothing to do with this, he said. The reporter kept filming. Who is she? Someone who sat beside me when I did not deserve anyone's patience. That is all. Leave her out of it. Marissa's eyes widened slightly. The reporter pushed harder. Did you know about the financial irregularities? Nate felt the old instincts rise. Deflect. Delay. Refer to counsel. Protect the company. Protect the name. Then he thought of Grace's father maintaining tracks through storms. His own father's note. The old man on the platform. I knew enough to speak sooner, Nate said. The station seemed to hold its breath. Marissa whispered his name, warning and heartbreak in one. Nate continued anyway. I did not steal from Whitmore. But I stayed silent because I thought silence could keep the company alive. I was wrong. People were hurt because I waited. The reporter's face changed. He knew he had a clip. Are you admitting responsibility? I'm admitting I should have told the truth before it became useful to me. That was all Nate said. Marissa pulled him away before the reporter could ask more. Within minutes, the video was online. Within 10, it had been clipped, captioned, argued over, praised, mocked, and sent to people who would never know what the station had felt like at 2 a.m. Grace watched the view count climb on someone else's phone across the room. She should have been afraid of him. Maybe she still was. Nate Whitmore was not innocent. She knew that more clearly now than she had an hour ago. But he had not hidden behind his lawyer. He had not let the camera eat her alive. He had not used her softness as shelter. He had stepped into the frame and taken the damage himself. The train still had not come. But when Nate returned to the bench, Grace did not move away. And in the cold, delayed hollow of the station, something fragile settled between them. By 3 in the morning, Nate Whitmore belonged to the internet. The video from the station had spread faster than the train delay updates. Every few minutes, someone's phone lit up with his face, tired, unshaven, standing beneath the fluorescent lights and admitting he had stayed silent too long. Some people called it accountability, others called it strategy. A few called Grace his mystery girl. That was the part Nate hated most. Marissa stood near the window, reading messages on her phone, with the controlled expression of a woman watching a building catch fire, while calculating which exits still worked. At sunrise, you come with me, she said. Straight to the office. No more statements without counsel. No more moral awakenings on camera. Nate rubbed both hands over his face. Grace sat on the bench a few feet away, pretending not to listen. She had pulled her father's bag back onto her lap like armor. Marissa lowered her voice. And she needs to go home before people decide she's part of the story. Nate looked toward Grace. The thought of asking for her number came and went several times. He wanted some proof that when the train finally came, this night would not vanish into scandal, headlines, and legal statements. He wanted to know she would be somewhere in the world, sketching dresses, carrying Tommy Miller's old bag, asking devastating questions of strangers. But wanting something did not make it fair. Grace was 19, heartbroken, cold, abandoned by a boy who had made leaving look easy. Nate was 31, disgraced, exposed, and still bleeding guilt into every room he entered. He could feel the danger in reaching for her too quickly, not because what he felt was false, because it was born in a night when both of them were broken open. Grace felt it too. She had started listening for his breathing in the silences, started caring whether his hands shook when another headline appeared, started feeling safer beside a man whose life was visibly collapsing than she had felt beside Lucas in months. That frightened her. She knew herself well enough to understand the pattern. Someone was kind, and she began building a small home inside that kindness. Someone looked at her as if her pain made sense, and she wanted to believe it meant they would stay. She could not let another person become an exit from her own life. Near 4 they returned to the platform. The sky beyond the high windows was beginning to pale, though the tracks remained empty. The station had taken on that gray, suspended quality of places waiting for morning crews and ordinary people to arrive. Grace sat beside Nate, close enough to feel his warmth, not close enough to admit she needed it. I don't want to go home, she said after a long silence. Nate did not look at her. Because of Lucas? Because of my mom? That surprised him. Grace stared at the rails. She thinks I'm brave. Or at least, she keeps saying Dad would want me to try. I don't know how to walk back into our kitchen and tell her I got left behind before I even made it to New York. The words were quiet, but the shame inside them was not. Nate understood shame. It had been sitting beside him all night, wearing his name. Going home doesn't make you a failure. That sounds like something adults say when they already survived being young. He accepted that. Then he said, failure isn't the worst thing. Building your whole life around being terrified someone might call you a failure, that's worse. Grace turned toward him. His eyes were on the tracks, but she could tell he was not seeing them. I did that, he continued. With my father's company, my mother's expectations. Every boardroom where people looked at me like I was either the future of Whitmore or the boy who would ruin it. I thought if I just held everything together, no one could say I had failed him. And now they're saying it anyway. Grace's throat tightened. Before she could answer, a black town car pulled up beyond the glass doors near the station entrance. Marissa saw it first. Her expression changed. Nate followed her gaze and went still. Evelyn Whitmore entered the station in a dark wool coat, her silver hair pinned perfectly, her face pale with sleeplessness and fury held under discipline. She looked less like a worried mother than the last surviving member of a royal house arriving to inspect a battlefield. 2 men followed her, one a driver, the other perhaps security. Behind them, a reporter who had been hovering near the entrance lifted his phone. Evelyn crossed the station with purpose. Nathaniel. Grace felt Nate straighten beside her. Not like a CEO, like a son. Evelyn's eyes moved over him, then landed on Grace. In that glance, Grace felt herself reduced to every cruel guess a stranger could make. Young, tired, cheap coat, old bag, sitting too close to a man whose scandal had become public before dawn. Evelyn did not need to say the word mistake. Her face said it. "You need to come with me," Evelyn said. Now, Nate stood. "Mother, no. You have done enough speaking tonight. That video is everywhere. Do you understand what you've done to what remains of this family?" Marissa stepped forward carefully. "Evelyn, this is not the place. It became the place when my son decided to confess to strangers in a train station." Grace lowered her eyes. She told herself not to care. Evelyn Whitmore was no one to her, a woman from another world, a mother protecting a name. But the way Evelyn looked at her made Grace feel like something left on a doorstep. Evelyn turned back to Nate. "You will come home. You will let the attorneys handle this. You will stop turning grief into spectacle. Your father's company is not a stage for your guilt." Something in Nate's face shifted at the word father. For most of his life, that word had worked on him like a command. Not now. "The company isn't my father," he said. Evelyn froze. Nate's voice shook, but he kept going. "The name isn't my father. The board isn't my father. And saving the Whitmore image is not the same as honoring him. Nathaniel, don't be childish. I've spent years not being childish." His laugh was small and bitter. "I skipped anger. I skipped grief. I skipped every selfish, honest thing, because everyone needed me to be the heir who could hold the roof up. And I still failed." The reporter near the entrance had moved closer. Marissa noticed, but did not interrupt. Evelyn's mouth tightened. "And this girl is helping you discover yourself." Grace flinched. Nate stepped slightly in front of her, then stopped himself. "She was not a shield. She was not a cause. Grace is not the reason I fell apart. She's just the first person tonight who didn't ask me to pretend I hadn't." The words struck Grace hard, because some wounded, hungry part of her wanted to take them and make a story from them. A story where being seen meant being chosen. A story where a man defending her in a train station meant she would never be left behind again. That was exactly why she had to be careful. She stood. "Nate," he turned. Her eyes were wet but steady. "Don't do that." His expression softened. "Do what?" "Make me proof that you've changed." The platform seemed to quiet around them. Grace looked at Evelyn, then Marissa, then the reporter, then back at Nate. "I'm grateful you said that. I am. But I can't be the girl you point to when you want to prove you're not your old life anymore. I can't be your rebellion. And I can't fall in love with someone who's using me as the first honest thing he's touched in years." The word love hung between them, startling because neither of them had meant to let it arrive yet. Nate's face opened with pain and respect at once. "You're right," he said. Grace almost wished he would argue. It would have been easier. She reached down and picked up her father's bag. The station speaker crackled again. No train. No resolution. Only another delay. That felt appropriate. Marissa's eyes softened. Even Evelyn, for a moment, looked less certain of her own anger. Nate took a card from his wallet. A heavy business card, expensive paper, embossed with the title he no longer had the right to claim. Nathaniel Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer. He stared at it, then borrowed Grace's pen from the outer pocket of her bag. Carefully, he crossed out the title. Underneath, he wrote a phone number by hand. No company. No office. No assistant. Just him. He held it out. "You don't owe me a call," he said. Grace took it. For a second, their fingers touched. Then she opened the work bag, took out the half of the sandwich she had saved, and wrapped it in a napkin. She placed it in his hand like a strange, sad blessing. "You don't owe me a beautiful ending," she said. Nate looked down at the sandwich. A broken laugh caught in his throat. Grace stepped back. Evelyn said nothing. Marissa opened the path toward the exit. Grace walked away first, her father's bag against her side and the crossed-out card in her pocket. Nate did not follow. That was the first decent thing he did for her that morning. He let her leave without turning her departure into another loss he had to manage. And as dawn gathered over 30th Street Station, two people who had almost mistaken each other for shelter chose something harder. They chose to stand on their own feet, for now. 3 months later, Grace Miller finally made it to New York, not the way Lucas had promised. Not with someone pulling her forward, not with someone deciding for her where bravery began. She went with her father's old work bag, a folder of sketches, and the small amount of money Tommy Miller had saved for the daughter he still believed in after death. She enrolled in a part-time design course and worked weekends at a vintage clothing shop. She still called her mother every night. She still worried about bills. But she no longer treated her dream like a betrayal. Nate changed too, though not in the clean, heroic way headlines preferred. He cooperated with investigators. He stepped away from control of Whitmore Rail Systems. He used what money and influence he still had to help create a retraining fund for workers hurt by the scandal. Some people thanked him. Others said it was too little too late. He accepted both. For once, he did not hide behind the sentence, "I was only trying to protect the company." He and Grace texted occasionally, nothing dramatic. She sent him a photo of her first dress pattern, uneven but alive with color. He sent her a picture of terrible coffee from a train station vending machine, captioned, "Still financially irresponsible." They learned how to be present without taking over each other's lives. One spring afternoon, Grace returned to 30th Street Station on her way to a student design showcase in New York. She saw Nate before he saw her. He was sitting on the same wooden bench, no expensive suit, no old briefcase, just a navy coat, tired eyes, and a paper cup of coffee he clearly regretted buying. He was waiting for a train to Harrisburg, where he was meeting former Whitmore workers about the retraining program. Grace sat beside him. For a moment, they smiled like two people remembering a night they had survived separately and together. "Still waiting for someone who's never coming back?" she asked. Nate looked toward the tracks. "No," he said. "This time I'm waiting for the right train." Grace laughed softly. They talked until the boarding announcement came. She was steadier now. Still young, still tender, but no longer asking someone else to prove she was worth choosing. Nate was quieter, less polished, less hungry to be forgiven. Before they parted, he asked if he could take her for coffee after her showcase. "Not to thank me," Grace said. "No. And not because we were sad together once. No. Then why? Because I'd like to know you when neither of us is falling apart." Grace looked at him for a long moment. "Slowly," she said. Nate smiled. "Slow is the first thing I learned after losing everything." Her train arrived first. This time Grace was not left behind. Nate was not waiting for a past that would return and make him whole. They boarded different trains, carrying the same quiet possibility. And maybe love did not begin that night on the platform because they were lonely. Maybe love began months later, when both of them had learned not to turn another person into a lifeboat. If I were Grace, I think I would have been tempted to make Nate my proof that I was still worth choosing. After being abandoned, even a little kindness can feel like rescue. But Grace chose something braver. She went to New York for herself first. If I were Nate, I would have wanted Grace to forgive me quickly, because guilt is lonely. But he learned that love cannot be used as shelter from consequences. So let me ask you, if you were Grace, would you have called Nate after that night, or would you have left him as a memory from the loneliest platform of your life? And if you were Nate, would you have told the truth knowing it might cost you everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you would have chosen. This is Soul Stirring Stories. Until next time, remember, love should not be the train we board because we are afraid to stand alone. Sometimes real love begins only after both people learn they can survive the platform by themselves.